Hello? My husband, what?
She got the call on a Tuesday afternoon, 2:17 p.m., a regular Tuesday. She had just put dinner on the stove. She would remember that detail for the rest of her life. The smell of something cooking, the way the kitchen light sat low on the counter, the exact second before everything she knew became everything she used to know. Her husband of 17 years had collapsed at an airport. By the time the paramedics reached him, he was already gone. His name was Sean. And until that Tuesday, Carol believed she knew exactly who Sean was. She had built her entire life on that belief. She had raised their son on that belief. She had chosen that belief every single morning for 17 years, the way you choose to trust the ground beneath your feet, without thinking about it, because why would you? The ground doesn't just disappear. Except, on a Tuesday at 2:17 p.m., it did. The funeral was 8 days later. 200 people came. Carol stood at that graveside in the cold, and she held herself together the way she always did, quietly, completely, and she thought that the worst thing that could ever happen to her had already happened. She was wrong. Because the day after the funeral, a box arrived. Sean's personal effects from the airport. His wallet, his watch, his phone, his laptop. And Carol, because she was the kind of woman who handled things, sat down at his laptop to start going through his emails, to notify people, to respond to the condolences, to do what needed doing. What she found on that laptop did not just break her heart. It rewrote it. It went back through every year, every memory, every quiet evening, every anniversary, every moment she had ever believed in. And it put a question mark at the end of all of them. Before I tell you what was on that screen, I want you to understand something. This is not a story about a monster. This is a story about a man who seemed, by every measure, like a good man, a successful man, a devoted father, a trusted husband. And that is precisely what makes what I'm about to tell you so deeply unsettling. Because if Carol couldn't see it, a woman who shared a bed, a bank account, a child, and 17 years of her life with this man, then it raises a question none of us really want to sit with. How well do any of us actually know the person we love most? Stay with me, because this story goes to places you will not see coming. And before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because trust me, what's coming next in this story is only the beginning. The box arrived the day after the service. Sean's wallet, his watch, his phone, his work laptop, all sealed in a standard cardboard shipping box, the kind you'd use to mail a birthday gift. Carol set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time before she opened it. She would later say that some part of her already knew. Not what exactly, but that something was inside that box that she wasn't ready for. She opened the laptop first, and within the first hour of going through his emails, she found a name she didn't recognize. A woman. Emails stretching back years. Warm, familiar, the kind of shorthand you only develop with someone you've known a long time. She told herself it was a work contact. She kept reading. By hour 2, she had found the photographs. By hour 3, she had found the credit card statements. Hotels she'd never heard of. Cities Sean had supposedly been working in. Charges that didn't line up with any story he had ever told her. By hour 4, Carol closed the laptop, walked to the back of the house, sat down on the bathroom floor, and stayed there until morning. She didn't cry. Not yet. She told me that what she felt in that moment wasn't even grief anymore. It was something colder than grief. Something she couldn't name. It was the feeling of realizing that the person you have been mourning, the person you have been crying over, eulogizing, defending in your heart, was not entirely the person you thought you lost. And that is a very different kind of loss. One that the world doesn't have a word for. But here's what I need you to understand, because this is where the story stops being about Sean and starts being about something much larger. What Carol uncovered over the next several weeks wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a secret. It was an entire architecture of deception, built carefully, maintained consistently, concealed completely, running parallel to the life she thought she was living. Hidden financial accounts. An addiction he had battled alone for years. Relationships she had never known existed. A version of her husband that operated freely in the spaces between the moments she could see. And the question that haunted Carol, the one she kept coming back to, the one she told me she still hasn't fully answered, wasn't, how did he do it? It was something simpler and far more devastating than that. It was, who exactly was I grieving? Carol didn't go to the media. She didn't call a lawyer right away. What she did instead was something that surprised even her closest friends. She started building a file. Folder by folder, statement by statement. She began reconstructing the last several years of Sean's life with the same patience he had clearly used to construct it in the first place. She started with the bank. As his widow, she had legal access to accounts she'd never thought to look at closely before, and there, buried under routine transfers and bill payments, she found a pattern. Small, recurring withdrawals. Always in cash. Always just under the amount that would trigger a bank flag. $19,000 over 3 years, moved quietly enough that it had never once shown up in their joint statements, in their shared spreadsheets, in any conversation they'd ever had about money. Then came the phone records. Carol had expected numbers she didn't recognize. What she didn't expect was how many there were. Some led nowhere, disconnected lines, wrong numbers, dead ends that wasted entire afternoons. She would later call these her false starts, the moments she was certain she'd found the answer only to realize she'd found nothing at all. One number she traced for 2 weeks turned out to belong to an old college friend Sean had reconnected with innocently. Another belonged to a colleague with no connection to anything. Each dead and cost her something. Each one also taught her to look closer before she let herself feel anything. But one number kept appearing. Tuesday evenings, almost every week, going back nearly 4 years. Always the same time. Always the same length, usually around 40 minutes. Carol stared at that pattern for a long time before she let herself call it what it was. A relationship. Sustained. Deliberate. Maintained with the same quiet consistency Sean brought to everything else in his life. She didn't call the number right away. She sat with it for nearly a month, turning it over, building up the nerve, rehearsing what she might say if a stranger picked up on the other end. When she finally did call, a woman answered on the second ring. Her name, we'll call her Diane. And what Diane told her in that first conversation was not what Carol expected. Diane hadn't known Sean was married. Not at first. She'd found out roughly a year into things, and by then, she said, she had already let herself fall too far to walk away cleanly. Sean had told her he was separated, going through a divorce that was taking longer than it should. He'd been convincing. He'd had 4 years of practice being convincing. Carol sat with that for a long time after she hung up the phone. Because suddenly the story wasn't as simple as villain and victim. Diane had been lied to as thoroughly as she had. 2 women, deceived by the same man, in different rooms of the same elaborate house he'd built out of half-truths. It would have been easy to stop there. Most people would have. But 3 weeks later, going through Sean's old email archive one more time, searching for nothing in particular, Carol found a folder she had somehow missed. It was labeled with a single letter. Inside was a thread of messages going back 11 years, long before Diane, long before most of what Carol thought she already understood. The messages were addressed to a name Carol didn't recognize, a woman in another state entirely, and buried near the bottom of that folder was a single attachment, a birth certificate, a child born 8 years earlier. Sean listed clearly as the father. Carol told me that this was the moment something shifted in her, not the discovery itself. By then she thought she'd built up some kind of tolerance for discovery. It was the math. 11 years. That meant this hadn't started after their marriage grew distant or after some specific crisis pushed him away. It had started while their own son was still in diapers. While she was building a life she believed was singular, Sean had already begun building a second one beside it. She made contact, eventually, the same careful way she'd made contact with Diane. The woman's name was Renee. And what Renee told her changed the shape of the entire story one final time. Renee hadn't been deceived the way Diane had. Renee had always known Sean was married. She'd made her peace with it years ago, in her own complicated way, because by the time she'd fully understood the situation, there was already a child between them, and leaving had started to feel more impossible than staying. For 11 years, Sean had not been living one secret life. He had been living 3 lives simultaneously. Each one convinced it was the most important, each one built carefully enough that none of the others ever had reason to suspect the others existed. A wife who believed she had married a devoted, ordinary man. A girlfriend who believed she'd fallen for someone separated and searching for something honest. And a mother of his child, who had quietly accepted a kind of half-life because the alternative felt worse. 3 women, 1 man. None of them had the full picture. Only Sean ever did. Carol told me the strangest part of finally understanding all of this wasn't the anger, though the anger came in waves she hadn't expected. It was the math she couldn't stop doing in her head. Birthdays that overlapped with calls she now knew weren't to colleagues. Anniversaries that fell during weeks she now knew he'd spent somewhere else entirely. An entire timeline of her own marriage that she had to quietly relabel, year by year, now that she finally had the key. The legal aftermath took the better part of a year. Because Sean had no will accounting for any of this, his estate became a tangle that 3 lawyers and 2 states had to sort through. Renee's child had a legal claim as Sean's biological heir. Diane had none, but came forward anyway, not for money, she said, but because she needed Carol to know she hadn't known either. Not at first. It was, by every account, an uncomfortable, complicated, deeply human resolution. Nobody walked away from it feeling like they'd won anything. What Carol kept coming back to, months later, wasn't the betrayal itself. It was something quieter and harder to sit with. She told me that the man who showed up every night for dinner, who coached their son's baseball team, who fell asleep next to her for 17 years, was real. That wasn't a performance. He had genuinely loved her, in whatever broken, incomplete way he was capable of loving anyone. And that's the part she still hasn't made peace with. Not that he lied, but that the love and the lying came from the exact same person, at the exact same time, and she still doesn't know how to hold both of those truths at once. This is the question I keep coming back to every time I sit down to tell a story like this one. Not whether people like Sean are monsters. That answer is easy, and it's also, I think, incomplete. The harder question is what it means that someone can build an entire second, third, even fourth life right alongside the people who love them most, and have none of it show on the surface. No red flags anyone could point to afterward and say, there, that's where I should have known. Because that's the part that should unsettle you. Not that bad people sometimes hide in plain sight. It's that ordinary people, the kind who coach Little League and remember anniversaries, sometimes do too. So I'll leave you with the same question Carol still asks herself. Was justice really served here? And more than that, if you were in her position, would you have wanted to know the truth at all? Or is there a version of this where some things are better left buried? Let me know what you think in the comments, and tell me where you're watching this from tonight. I read every single comment on stories like this one. And if this story stayed with you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because next week I'm telling you about a man who faked his own disappearance for 11 years, and the one mistake that finally brought him home.